General Gálvez was sent to New Orleans as the colonial governor by King Carlos III in 1776. Before he left, the king told him, prepare for war with England. And so, when Gálvez arrived in New Orleans, he had two main tasks. One was to secure warehouses for all the goods that were coming in from Spain and France. And second was to create a militia. He had a small garrison of about a company of men, but that wasn't enough to wage war because in New Orleans they were surrounded by British forts. There was one at Manchac, just up the river, one at Baton Rouge, and even further north in Natchez. And then on the Gulf Coast, there was one in Mobile, and 3 forts at Pensacola, which was the British stronghold in the Gulf and the Caribbean. So when he got there, they recruited blacks, both free and slaves, Germans. There were a group of people from Canada who were uprooted by the British and taken and dropped off in Louisiana. These were people were from Acadia, and we call them Cajuns now. And there were a bunch of Cajuns that were in his militia. So when war was declared by Spain on England in May of 1780, Gálvez was ready. He left New Orleans with 700 militia in addition to his garrison of Spanish troops. By the time they got to Manchac, they had 1,400 because they were picking up volunteers along the way. The people from Canada hated the British for uprooting them. And as they left the harbor, they were watching their homes and their crops burning in the field, and they saw their livestock that had been slaughtered. So he had good morale amongst his troops. He was successful in his campaign against the British troops at Manchac. Baton Rouge required some skill, but he defeated them, and the commanding officer at the British fort in Baton Rouge sent a note to the commander of the British detachment at Natchez, Mississippi, suggesting very strongly that he surrender, which he did without a shot being fired. Well, then Gálvez returned to New Orleans and prepared for an attack on Mobile. That was successful. He removed the British. His last big job was to remove the British from Pensacola. There were 3 British forts that each supported the other, plus a couple of detachments on either side of the pass leading into Pensacola Bay. So on his first trip, I say first because there were 2, he headed towards Pensacola with about 4,000 troops. They didn't have good weather reports then, and so he didn't know about the hurricane, which ended up destroying his fleet. Dejected, he came back to Havana and wrote to the king asking for more troops and more ships and more weapons. And months passed, but the king came through. The king felt it was important. So Gálvez was leading 7,800 troops into battle. Think about this. George Washington's Continental Army was about 6,000, and the British commander had about 6,000. So this was a substantial number. I won't go into details, but the battle is very interesting, and Gálvez took Pensacola. He is now one of the 7 people who are honorary U.S. citizens, and that's quite a bit to say about a person. So I'll sum it up by saying, without Spain's assistance, we would still be flying the British flag. Thank you very much.